The Silent House. It all started with a letter. Alex had been the first to find it, a crisp envelope tucked inside his mailbox. There was no return address, just his name, written in elegant, old-fashioned script. He opened it with curiosity, his brow furrowing as he read the words inside, an invitation to a mansion in the middle of nowhere, promising adventure, excitement, and, most intriguingly, an inheritance if he and his friends could stay there for 48 hours. It sounded absurd, like the plot of a bad horror movie, yet something about the idea thrilled him. He could already picture the looks on his friends' faces. By the end of the day, Mia, Chris, Emily, and Liam had all received identical invitations. The group gathered at Alex's apartment to discuss the bizarre offer. "It's probably some prank," Mia said, tossing her invitation onto the table. "Who even owns a mansion like that anymore?" "Does it matter?" Chris grinned. "We haven't had a decent adventure in months. Plus, think of the money. If it's real, we'll be set." Emily shivered. "I don't know, guys. There's something weird about this. Why us? And why a mansion in the middle of nowhere?" Liam shrugged. "Maybe it's some eccentric old millionaire who died with no heirs. This could be his way of choosing who gets his fortune. Or it could just be a joke. Either way, what's the harm? We spend 2 nights in a spooky old house and walk away with a story to tell." After some debate, they agreed. The plan was set for the coming weekend. The drive to the mansion was long and unsettling. As they wound through dense forests, the road narrowed, and the trees seemed to close in around them. The sun was beginning to set when they finally arrived, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. The mansion stood tall and silent, an imposing structure of dark stone and weathered wood. Its windows were dark, and the air around it felt unnaturally still. As they stood before the heavy oak doors, Mia hesitated. "Are we sure about this?" Alex smirked, pushing the door open. "It's just a house. What's the worst that could happen?" They stepped inside, unaware that they had just crossed the threshold into a nightmare. The moment the door creaked shut behind them, a cold draft swept through the foyer. The house greeted them with silence, the kind that pressed down on their shoulders, heavy and suffocating. Dust hung in the air, and their footsteps echoed through the grand, dimly lit hall as they ventured deeper into the mansion. Is it just me, or does it feel colder in here? Emily rubbed her arms, trying to shake off the sudden chill. Alex chuckled. "It's an old house. Probably no insulation." But even he couldn't deny the strange atmosphere. The air was thick with the musty scent of age, and there was something else, something they couldn't quite place. A faint melody, distant and barely audible, like a music box playing far away. They explored the first floor, passing through rooms that seemed frozen in time. Antique furniture sat untouched, covered in a fine layer of dust. The walls were lined with faded portraits of stern-faced men and women, their eyes seeming to follow them as they moved from room to room. Each step they took felt like an intrusion, like they were being watched. Anyone else hear that? Mia suddenly stopped, her brow furrowed. "Hear what?" asked Liam. "Music. Really faint. Like it's coming from somewhere in the house." The others paused, listening intently. For a moment, they heard nothing but the distant wind outside. Then, as if in response to Mia's words, the soft melody drifted through the air again, just out of reach. It was haunting, yet oddly beautiful. "Probably just an old record player stuck on repeat," Chris said, though his voice lacked confidence. "This place is ancient." Still, unease crept into their hearts as they continued to explore. Strange things began to happen. Doors they had left open were now closed. The temperature dropped even lower, their breath visible in the dim light. And the whispers At first they thought it was the wind, but soon it became clear. Voices, barely audible, seemed to echo from the walls themselves. By nightfall, the tension had become unbearable. They gathered in the grand sitting room, attempting to shake off the feeling that the house was more than just empty space. "We should stick together tonight," Mia suggested, her eyes darting nervously to the dark hallways. "Something's not right here." As they settled in for the night, the house seemed to breathe, its silence now a living, watchful thing. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Morning broke, but it brought no sense of relief. The sunlight barely pierced the thick curtains, casting long shadows across the room. The air felt even colder than the night before, as if the house itself was drawing the warmth from their bodies. Alex woke first and immediately noticed something was wrong. Liam's sleeping bag, which had been next to the fireplace, was empty. At first, Alex thought maybe he'd gone to the bathroom or wandered off to explore, but as minutes ticked by, the sense of unease grew. "Has anyone seen Liam?" Alex called, his voice breaking the stillness. Mia sat up groggily, her eyes widening when she noticed Liam's absence. "He was right there," she said, pointing to the empty space by the fire. "He couldn't have just left." Chris and Emily exchanged worried glances as they began searching the house, their calls for Liam echoing off the cold walls. The house seemed larger now, more labyrinthine. Hallways that had once been familiar now seemed to twist and turn into endless darkness. Each door they opened led to another empty room, another dead-end. "He wouldn't have just wandered off without telling us," Mia muttered, panic creeping into her voice. What if something happened to him? "Calm down," Alex said, trying to steady his own nerves. "We'll find him. Maybe he got lost in this maze of a house." But Mia shook her head. "No, this is wrong. Something's wrong." Hours passed and still no sign of Liam. They regrouped in the foyer, their faces pale and filled with dread. "Maybe he left the house," Chris suggested weakly. "Maybe he went outside for some air." "But his shoes are still here," Emily pointed out, her voice trembling. "He wouldn't have left without them." That's when Mia pulled the diary from her backpack. "I found this yesterday in one of the upstairs rooms," she said, flipping it open. "It belonged to the previous owner, I think. It's filled with strange entries about people going missing in this house, people who were never found." The others stared at her in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Alex asked, his tone sharp. "Because I didn't want to freak everyone out. But now, I think whatever happened to them might have happened to Liam." As her words settled in, the house seemed to grow darker, the walls closing in. A chilling realization gripped them all. Liam wasn't just missing. He was gone. The realization that Liam was truly gone sent waves of panic through the group. No one wanted to admit it, but the mansion felt alive, as if it was swallowing them whole, one by one. Every corner, every creak in the floorboards seemed to hold some hidden menace. Mia clutched the old diary, thumbing through its yellowed pages in a desperate search for answers. "We need to know more about this place," she said, her voice shaky. "There has to be something in here that tells us what's going on." Chris, pacing near the dusty fireplace, glanced at her. "What could some old book possibly tell us that we don't already know? This place is bad news. We need to leave before someone else disappears. We can't just leave Liam." Alex snapped, his frustration boiling over. "We'll find him, but first, we need to understand what we're dealing with." Emily, who had been silent for most of the morning, suddenly spoke up. "I found something too. There's a mirror upstairs in one of the bedrooms, but it's strange." When I looked into it, I didn't see myself. I saw asterisk, someone else asterisk, watching me. Mia's eyes widened. What do you mean, someone else? Emily shivered, hugging herself tightly. It was like a reflection, but not mine. It was a woman, in old-fashioned clothes, standing right behind me. When I turned around, no one was there. But I could feel her. She was watching me. I'm sure of it. The group fell silent, the weight of Emily's words settling over them like a dark cloud. Mia flipped through the diary again, stopping on a page near the middle. "Listen to this," she said, her voice hushed. "The mansion was once home to a group of people who practiced rituals, dark rituals. They believed they could trap souls within the house, using it as a prison to contain spirits that would do their bidding. The longer someone stayed in the mansion, the more the house could pull them in, until they were part of it, body and soul. Like Liam," Chris said, his voice barely a whisper. Mia nodded. If what this diary says is true, Liam might not just be lost. He could be trapped here, like the others. The room felt colder, heavier. The walls seemed to close in, and for the first time they all shared the same terrifying thought. The house didn't just want to scare them. It wanted to keep them. "We have to find the source," Alex said, standing up. "Whatever's doing this, it's tied to the house. If we can destroy it, maybe we can get Liam back." But as they ventured deeper into the mansion, the shadows grew longer, and the house seemed to shift around them, warping into a maze that threatened to consume them all. By the time night fell, the house had taken on an entirely different presence. The walls felt closer, the air thicker, and the oppressive silence was shattered by the occasional creak or whisper that none of them could place. Every room seemed to shift and change. Hallways that once led to familiar places now twisted into dark, unknown spaces. The group, already on edge from Liam's disappearance, began to unravel. "I'm telling you, we need to get out of here now," Chris yelled, pacing back and forth in the grand hall. His voice echoed off the high ceilings, making him sound even more frantic. "Screw this mansion, screw the inheritance, and screw this whole nightmare. Liam is gone, and we're next." Mia shook her head, her fingers nervously flipping through the diary, searching for any clue she might have missed. "We can't leave. Not yet. We still don't know what we're dealing with. If we go, whatever's inside this house might follow us." Chris scoffed. "What are you talking about? This place is cursed. There's no figuring it out. We just need to run." "Running won't save us," Alex snapped, stepping in front of Chris. "Do you even hear yourself? We can't just abandon Liam." "You think he's still alive?" Chris spat back. "He's gone, Alex. Open your eyes." Tensions flared, and for a moment it looked like the two might come to blows. Emily stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear. She hadn't spoken much since her experience with the mirror, but now her voice trembled as she broke the silence. "It's what the house wants." All eyes turned to her. "The house. It's feeding on us. Our fear, our anger. It's making us turn on each other," she said, barely above a whisper. "That's how it takes people." Mia's gaze shot back to the diary. "She's right," she muttered, scanning a passage. "It says here the house manipulates the minds of its guests, causing them to distrust one another. It thrives on chaos, on division. The more we fight, the stronger it becomes." Chris threw up his hands in frustration. "So what do we do? Hold hands and sing Kumbaya while the house eats us alive?" "No," Mia said firmly. "We stay together and we keep calm. That's the only way we stand a chance." But as they argued, an unseen force slowly crept into the room, feeding on their panic, and in the depths of the mansion, a shadow moved, as if the house itself was preparing for its next victim. The tension hung thick in the air as the group struggled to calm down, but the mansion seemed intent on stirring their fear. The temperature dropped even further, their breath now visible in the cold, suffocating atmosphere. Every step they took sent shivers down their spines. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. The house was alive, watching, waiting. Emily was the first to break the uneasy silence. "We need to go to the basement," she whispered. "That's where the diary says the rituals happened. Whatever's controlling this place, it's down there." "Are you crazy?" Chris shook his head, his eyes wild with fear. "We don't even know what's down there. Liam went missing without a trace, and now you want to walk straight into the heart of this nightmare." Alex nodded grimly. "She's right, though. If we're going to stop this thing, we need to face it. There's no other way." Reluctantly, Chris agreed, and they made their way toward the basement door. The path seemed longer than before, the hallway stretching into darkness, the house warping as if trying to trap them. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every corner held the promise of something lurking just out of sight. When they reached the basement door, they hesitated. It was old, rotting, with strange symbols carved into the wood, symbols that matched the ones they'd seen etched into the walls upstairs. Mia brushed her fingers over the carvings. "These symbols," she muttered, "they're not just decorations. They're part of the ritual, meant to bind the entity here." Chris gave the door a sharp kick, and it groaned open, revealing a staircase that descended into pitch black. The air that wafted up from below was damp and fetid, carrying a smell of decay. They stepped into the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The room was cavernous, its stone walls lined with more of the symbols. In the center of the floor was an altar, its surface stained with dark, dried blood. It was here, they knew, that the rituals had taken place, where the house had been cursed, trapping whatever malevolent force now controlled it. Suddenly the air grew heavier, colder. A deep, unnatural growl echoed through the room, and a shape began to materialize before them. A figure, made of shadows and smoke, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. The entity was no longer hiding. It had come to greet them. "It's feeding on us," Mia whispered. "Our fear. It makes it stronger." The entity loomed over them, its presence suffocating. They had finally come face to face with the force that had been stalking them all along. "Stay together!" Alex shouted, his voice shaking. "Don't give it what it wants." But the entity moved closer, its hollow eyes fixed on them, hungry for their fear. The entity loomed over them, its form a swirling mass of shadow and smoke, as if it were a piece of the darkness itself. Its yellow eyes bore into them, and the air felt thick, as though the house was breathing alongside it, alive with malevolent intent. The group huddled together, trying to steady their breath, knowing full well that their terror only made it stronger. "We can't fight it," Chris muttered, his voice trembling. "It's too strong." "No," Mia said firmly, clutching the diary to her chest. "We can fight it. The diary mentions a ritual, something the original inhabitants were trying to finish when they all vanished. If we can reverse the curse, maybe we can break its hold on the house and free Liam." "That sounds great, but how are we supposed to perform some ancient ritual with no idea what we're doing?" Alex asked, his voice tight with fear, glancing nervously at the entity. "The diary explains enough," Mia said, flipping through the pages, her hands shaking. "We need to break the binding sigils. The symbols carved into the walls are what keep this thing here. If we destroy them, we sever its connection to the house." The entity shifted closer, as if it understood their plan, its yellow eyes narrowing in anticipation. "Where do we start?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. Mia pointed at the altar. "The first symbol is here. We need to deface it. Once we do, we'll move through the house and destroy the rest." Chris grabbed a piece of broken stone from the floor and, without hesitating, began scratching at the symbol carved into the altar. The entity roared, its shadowy form expanding, but it recoiled as the symbol was defaced. It wasn't defeated, but they had weakened it. The group didn't wait. They raced through the basement, finding more symbols etched into the walls. With each one they defaced, the entity howled in fury, its form flickering, becoming more unstable. But as they moved upstairs to the main floor, the house itself fought back. The walls seemed to shift, doors appeared where there were none before, and the rooms stretched into impossible distances. "We're getting closer," Mia shouted, racing down a hallway with Alex and Emily. "It's trying to stop us." But when they reached the foyer, Chris was nowhere to be seen. They stopped in their tracks, looking around wildly. "Chris!" Alex shouted, panic rising. "Where are you?" Suddenly a scream tore through the house, echoing from the darkness. Chris's voice, filled with terror, was abruptly cut off. They froze. The entity was fighting harder now. It was losing control of the house, but it wasn't going down without taking more of them with it. "We don't have time," Mia said, her voice cracking. "We need to destroy the last sigil. We'll find Chris after." But they all knew the truth. If they didn't finish this soon, there would be no one left to save.
The house seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, its walls shifting and groaning as if alive. Alex, Mia, and Emily raced through the distorted hallways, the air around them thick with dread. Every corner they turned felt wrong, as if the mansion itself was warping to confuse them. The entity, now furious and desperate, grew stronger with each second, its shadow looming behind them like a storm ready to swallow them whole. "We're almost there," Mia shouted, her eyes locked on the final sigil etched into the wall near the grand staircase. The symbol glowed faintly, pulsing with a sickly energy, the last link keeping the entity bound to the mansion.
But the entity wasn't finished yet. As they approached the sigil, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The house groaned and shook, causing pieces of the ceiling to collapse around them. Emily screamed as a large piece of debris narrowly missed her, but she kept moving, her eyes wide with terror. Suddenly Chris's scream echoed again, but this time it was closer, too close. His voice came from the darkness behind them, but when they turned, all they saw was a shifting shadow. The entity had taken him. Mia forced herself to focus. "We destroy this, and it all ends," she shouted, gripping the broken stone she had used earlier to deface the other symbols. But as she stepped toward the sigil, the entity lunged. Its form was monstrous now, an amalgamation of shadows, faces, and twisted bodies, swirling and writhing as it lashed out. It knocked Alex off his feet, sending him crashing into a wall with a sickening thud. Emily screamed, rushing to help Alex, but Mia didn't hesitate. She threw herself at the wall, slashing at the sigil with the stone. The entity let out a deafening roar, its form flickering violently as Mia carved into the ancient markings. The house seemed to buckle, its walls shuddering as the sigil began to fade. The air around them became heavy, pressing down on their lungs as the entity writhed in pain, unable to stop Mia's frenzied attacks. With one final strike, the sigil broke. The effect was immediate. The entity screamed, a sound so terrible it rattled their bones. Its shadowy form twisted and collapsed, imploding in on itself as it was pulled into the darkness, consumed by the very house it had haunted for so long. The mansion let out a long, shuddering breath, and then silence. For a moment, none of them moved. The air was still, unnaturally quiet. Mia, covered in dust and trembling with exhaustion, stumbled back, watching as the last remnants of the entity vanished. Emily rushed to Alex, helping him to his feet. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia nodded, her eyes fixed on the empty space where the entity had once loomed. "It's over." But the victory felt hollow. Chris was gone. Liam was gone. The house had claimed them, and no amount of breaking symbols could bring them back. The mansion, now silent and still, felt like a tomb. As they staggered toward the front door, they realized the house hadn't just been a trap. It had been a grave for countless souls. And though they had escaped with their lives, they knew the darkness that had lived there might never truly be gone. As they stepped into the cold night air, leaving the mansion behind, a faint whisper followed them. "Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos."